Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to this book launch. Thanks for being here. Welcome to friends, family, colleagues, clients, all of you interested in the topic of leadership. And that is one thing interesting or fascinating actually with the topic of leadership is that we all, to some degree, feel concerned by this topic. To some degree, we all feel we have some leadership. And this book is actually an opportunity to explore that further and how we can develop that leadership even more. The idea that we all have leadership is actually a new idea. 100 years ago or so, we still had the idea that basically leadership was divided between those who had it and those who don't. And then a few of us, or a few people in our society had this gift to lead other people, and the others were just destined to be followers. What we have discovered in the last 100 years or so, and especially through the movement of democracy, is that we have free will and we can actually organize ourselves in intelligent ways, creatively, and leadership is this force that allows us to freely create organizations, relationships that are creative and that can serve us better. Whereas being commanded by an authoritarian leader will get the job done. But how much of you will be satisfied in that exercise? Well, that's another question. So we're in an era where everybody feels concerned by this topic. We're also seeing more and more people becoming leadership coaches, experts. I mean, when I started in this area a few decades ago, leadership was still a specialized area, whereas today it seems to be so much more popular. And there are good reasons for that. And it's important because leadership is important. If we don't exercise leadership, if we don't develop leadership in our groups, in our families, in our organizations, basically we'll always rely on someone to tell us what to do, or we'll basically just will be ineffective in how we organize ourselves. So it's actually something we all need to develop, and there's good reasons why we do feel compelled to do so. Another reason why leadership is interesting is that it's a very practical topic. How do we execute this recording today, this video, and show you the best? There's many people involved. That's a task we need to accomplish. But leadership is also very personal. How do I lead my life? How do you lead your life? This is all different. And leadership helps us shed light on how to proceed in doing that in a more autonomous way. This book basically started when people ask me, when did you start writing this book? One of my answers is, 30 years ago. And actually, that's where the story started. So before I go into the content, I'd like to share a bit of the background that led to this project. In a nutshell, 30 years ago, a young 26-year-old PhD student in organizational behavior, passion for the field, and also in years where a lot of questions were explored. And I remember my PhD professor saying, he says, François, his name was Suresh, he says, François, a master's degree is important, it's a good thing, and I already had my master's in psychology. But he says a PhD is different, and a PhD is about bringing something different, something new. And it's okay to say what other people are saying, but what do you have to bring to the soup of what leadership is about? And essentially, that was the start of this project. What also happened in the meantime is through this exploration and these questioning, I'll be very candid, I experienced some pretty powerful spiritual experiences that had a very strong impact in my life. And how to make sense of the spirituality and the leadership was something I was struggling with, to the point where I just felt I had to leave. I had to leave the PhD and to pursue my own questioning and find those answers. But I did commit to one thing then, when I left the PhD, is that one day I would produce an intelligent reflection on leadership that would bring together the wisdoms of management, of psychology, and spirituality. And that was the starting point 30 years ago. So the intention to produce an intellectually solid reflection on leadership that would integrate wisdom, as I said, from management, psychology, philosophy, and spirituality in an accessible way. I would say my contribution and the value of this book, I would say, is being one that makes accessible, sometimes very complex knowledge from different fields, but how they can be that knowledge can be much more simpler, presented in a much simpler way, and how what is most impressive and how so many ideas are basically similar in so many of these different areas. So the idea through this journey was I can bring this together in an accessible way so that you can make more sense of how to exercise your leadership better. So I say basically the value in this book are four things. One is, yes, there's research. I eventually completed my PhD on this topic, so there's feedback from clients that I studied. So it's grounded in solid research. I think there is a weakness in leadership today is we're starting to reinvent the wheel a lot, and it's like it's a new flavor of the month. But let's go back to basics. So this book brings some of that. So the research, the theory, without being overwhelming, but at least giving us that basic knowledge of what other people have studied or researched about this topic. The other is that, yes, there's theories, research, and there's consulting anecdotes. So throughout my career, I've had the chance to meet many leaders, and I've had the chance to meet many great leaders as well, and I've learned most from them. And I include some wonderful anecdotes of some of these encounters and how these leaders showed me those best practices. So I share some of those in the book. So they're very concrete examples as well. So there's research, there's anecdotes, many quotes as well. So we talk about covering different fields, but there's a lot of wisdom in those areas. So the quotes are also part of the book that can be a quick way to just get some of the essence. And so there's the research, there's the anecdotes, there's the quotes, and there's the exercises. Because this is a guide. This is a guide to help you grow in your own leadership. So there's a variety of exercises that you can do. And speaking of exercises, let's start with one that will get us really into the topic. And essentially, when I've started doing my leadership workshops, I've started with one question to look at what good leadership is about. So essentially, I would ask, and I've been asking for many years, this question, and I'll ask you to do it for yourself. And you'll see it's a very interesting exercise. I call this the significant leader exercise. So what I would ask you is to reflect in your life and identify the person you have interacted with. So someone we want a concrete interaction. We don't want just a personality figure on TV or whatever. So because with leadership, we can fly very high very quickly. So we want to stay concrete. Someone I've interacted with and someone that stands out as my best example of leadership. It could be a parent, it could be a coach, could be a teacher at school, former boss, anyone in your life, from whatever area in your life that you want, but that person stands out as your best example of leadership. If you think of outstanding leadership, that person stands out. And then, related to that, identify the distinctive quality that made that person such an outstanding example of leadership. What single quality stands out and makes you identify that person as such a great leader? And as you think through about your example of that great leader and the quality, you can continue. I've been doing this exercise for 20 years now. And what struck me is every time I do the exercise and I go on the flip chart, qualities would generally fall into two categories, and we're getting to choosing the transformational attitudes. There would be the category of this leader had vision, determination, perseverance, task focus. That whole area of basically a forceful intent and an idea of where these people wanted to go. And then there would be another category that I would say people would identify as my significant leader was someone who listened, someone who showed empathy, someone who was a unifier, someone who cared for other people. And there was basically a pattern of these groupings. And in fact, there was it was surprising and not surprising because those groupings have been highlighted in management theories for a while. And what I was also noticing is they were also highlighted in psychology and in philosophy. And I'll briefly present to you some of these qualities, and very briefly, I don't want to overwhelm you with theory, but just to show you how this idea basically is pretty much a generalizable idea. So if we look at management, for example, So right off the bat, in 1918, this woman, Mary Parker Follett, who's probably the best thinker on management we've had, spoke of this idea of power with. And she said leadership essentially is an exercise in power with rather than power over. Commandment is power over. Leadership is I have power with you, and together we want to do something. And then there was a series of research then on traits and behaviors, and they were again presenting two groupings, task focus, as you see, relationship focus. So that whole tendency of being focused on the task, focus on the people and on the relationship, so that good leaders, were basically what we're saying, were good at being situational, adapting to the situation. You need to basically focus on what needs to be done, you do it, but if you also need to listen to people and bring in their input, you can also do that. So that was basically until the 70s. What happened after that is we had other theories, we call these learning theories, and they said, yeah, traits are interesting, behaviors are interesting, but before behaviors, they're attitudes. The way I look at things will influence how things happen. And here we have these other theories in the 70s where they talk about design, you organize things, and emergence, you let things happen. Proto-learning, retro-learning, again, is forward-looking and looking back. And then more recently, some of you may have read Good to Great, this popular book by Jim Collins, where he says outstanding leaders combine both fierce professional will and deep personal humility. And Otto Scharmer, Peter Senge, and others also have identified similar ideas where they speak that a leader will basically impact the situation depending on his or her intentions and attention, the way I look at things, the way I perceive things, I respond to things, and the way I engage things will basically determine the kind of leadership that I exercise. So the question now is we're getting to some of the idea of the mind power. Is my way of thinking will essentially affect the way I lead. Now, basically, I'm going quickly over this. It's a lot of material, but you'll see how it's so consistent because those were items in management. But let's look at psychology. I've highlighted a few, but here the psychologist would say if you're going to be a fully individuated person, which is the idea of being fully individual, becoming fully yourself, well then to become that, there's certain characteristics you need to integrate in yourself. You need to be affirmative. Jung spoke about that masculine. Some people may react to these gender words, but the idea is being affirmative, taking your place, affirming what you want, and at the same time, caring, listening to others. So it's not just about you. And if you're going to function with other people, those are really important characteristics to integrate within you. Rollo May, existential psychology, did the same. And more recently, cognitive therapies have been very popular in changing behaviors by the way I can accept things and commit to making changes that I want to make. So again, psychology speaks of these characteristics. And not only psychology, philosophy. If we go 3,000, if I count correctly, 3,000, 2,000, we're over, I made the, not too strong here, let's just, 3,723 years ago, I'm sorry. 3,723 years ago, Chinese philosophers basically were saying that life was an ever-changing flux, and that change was inherent in life, and that in this inherent flux, changing flux of life, there are two forces. There's an assertive force, which they call about the yang force, and there's a yin force, which is a more receptive, conciliative force. And in Hindu philosophy, in the Yoga Sutra, Patanjali speaks also of a fierce resolve, the idea that there's something in me that wants, and my leadership, my life leadership will depend on how I'm grounded in that sense of unique resolve. But to understand that sense of resolve, how can I be listening to what really wants inside of me? So the idea of listening is combined with that. So you see how through management, philosophy, psychology, these items always come back as if these two categories or these two components that are involved in exercising leadership. I like these quotes that highlight this aspect that we talk about of transformational attitudes, transformational ways of looking at things in which we as humans have the power to exercise. Early 20th century, another psychologist, William James, spoke of the greatest discovery of his generation as the capacity to change one's life by changing one's attitude. More recently, Wayne Dyer, another psychologist, has this nice way to phrase it. The way you look at things changes the things you look at. And leadership is a way of looking at the present, looking at the future, that changes your situation, that changes you, and that creates that unified momentum we're talking about. So, the proposed model is this one. Two attitudes that we combine in that yin-yang force that are at the core of exercising leadership. One is an intentional attitude. What do I want? What do we want together? That will be our driving force as leadership. But in complement, also, am I able to appreciate, listen to situations, listen to people, listen to what I want? And as a group, can we appreciate together? Can we appreciate our different points of view, the different inputs, so that we create that collective force? And so those are the two core attitudes that I present in this model and that we'll explore further. Now you'll say to me, okay, so what's so transformational, François, about these attitudes? Well, the first thing I'd like to say to correct about leadership are three things. First thing about leadership that we've confused is that leadership is not innate. You are not born with leadership. Kings have liked to convince us that it was the case, but it is not the case. And anyone who tells you it is the case, I would take some distance from that person. So it's not innate. The other thing, too, about leadership is that it is not hierarchical, which means, and here I'm a bit blunt, your quality or your capacity in leadership is not directionally proportional to your hierarchical level. In fact, it may be inversely proportional. I've seen it. So it takes a lot of, this topic involves humility. And we're all on a learning curve, and we all have our learning, our strengths and our learning points, but it's a journey. And the third, so it's not innate, it's not a hierarchical, and the third, it's not permanent. I do not have a tag that says I'm a leader, and that makes me the permanent leader. I can be a great leader right now, and I can be a not so great leader 5 minutes later. So it's an ongoing thing of becoming, basically. But yes, so you're telling me, okay, François, this is interesting. There's the yin, there's the yang, there's the willful force that is important to know where I want to go or where we want to go as a group. And there's our capacity to listen, to appreciate. And you'd say, so how are those transformative? Well, here we go. Let's try it. The transformational power of appreciation. Let's try it. And by doing so, I'll propose another exercise that I suggest in the book and that we can do right now in real time. The question I'd like to share with you is this first one, and it's to look back on your day thus far. What time it is right now where you are, think of your day since the moment you woke up this morning. Identify the one thing you have most appreciated of your day thus far. The one thing you could say, yeah, I'm really happy about this, I'm really satisfied, and I'm really grateful for that. What is that thing? And once you've identified that thing, think about it a bit more. What does it bring to me? Why is it good? Appreciation has different effects, has three effects. The first effect is awareness. By taking this time right now, you've looked at your day, you've seen things you had forgotten probably, and you've highlighted things that were important, which you probably had forgotten. So it brings awareness and you connect with your day rather than reacting all the time as we often do. But more than that, appreciation brings an emotional level of energy. That aspect that you've identified most likely has generated positive feelings within you. You felt better. You've transformed in real time your sense of being by appreciation, by appreciating. It's the power of gratitude as well. But more than that, appreciating brings you awareness, emotional, positive energy, but it brings meaning. And the one thing you've identified that you value most speaks of what's important to you today. And it also speaks of what you want tomorrow. And as I often say, appreciation is an intentional attitude, it's a directional attitude. It will give you direction by this way of looking at things. So a way of looking at things that brings you awareness, positive emotional energy, and direction. And it happens to you individually, as it probably has right now, and it will happen, multiply in groups if you do it in groups. The other transformational attitude is the intentional attitude. Is as humans, we differ from animals in one particular thing, is that we can invent our future, or we can imagine our future. Whereas the animal is defined by their instincts in whatever the future will be. And so as humans, we have that freedom to create. And we have that freedom to create as a function of what we desire. In fact, I speak of the hero myth in the book, and as you will notice often in hero stories, there's a sword, as if our will serves as a sword. If I define what I want this afternoon, I'm already cutting in through reality and influencing how things will happen. So it's a human capacity that I have, and that is core, obviously, to leadership, because leadership is a future-oriented action. So that idea of anticipating the future is core to leadership. But that intention also can be a truly individual thing. And that's where the Hindus also spoke about Sankalpa and others as well. But we could even say, yes, what you want is important, but we could also say what wants inside of you. What are those talents that you particularly enjoy using? What are those dreams that really you want to accomplish? That unique wanting inside of you, which is basically your source of energy, is where all our leadership basically starts from. And often that question can be very simple, but not so easy to answer. Again, these two key complementary principles. But again, you could say, François, this is great. You've got the intentional, the appreciative, it's all super, but give me more. What does it mean to be intentional? What does it mean to be appreciative? And that's an excellent question. This brings me to where I did complete my PhD and did a research to exactly answer that question. And in the PhD that I completed between 2014 and 2018, we took 1 year of data collection, and during that year, I collected data from 17 workshops that I did with leaders from around the world. In those 17 workshops, we did the significant leader exercise and asked the question, who is your significant leader? Which characteristic distinguishes that person? There were 271 participants. So I had flip charts from these 17 workshops, 271 participants, 278 characteristics that were identified from these participants. So here we are referring to leaders who say that their best leader in their whole life was identified as so because of that characteristic. And we have 278 of those. So basically, I took the 278 through a method called thematic analysis, identified in those 278, 6 sub-themes. Are there sub-themes? Yes. Vision came out a lot. Passion came out a lot. Caring came out a lot. And so these words came up and basically identified 6 sub-themes 3, you could say, are appreciative, and 3 who were intentional. And then you'll say, okay, Francois, tell us, what are the 6 sub-themes? Don't ask us to buy the book. And I say, okay, I'll show the 6 sub-themes, but I still think the book is a good idea. So let's go quickly, and then we can wrap up with this. The first sub-theme that came up in terms of a characteristic of these outstanding leaders was the idea of open and receptive listening. If there's one thing that is striking on theories of leadership these days, is how humility is standing up as one of the core cardinal qualities in the exercise of leading. Because if you're just not listening, you're just closed, you're jammed, you can't adapt, you can't learn. And unfortunately, you also fall into reactive modes where you're just never really open to being influenced, and you can never change, essentially. And this is where there's really interesting links with the spiritual stuff as well, the current in mindfulness and meditation, all these things as leaders in a world that goes real fast. If you're not there and listening to what's happening, you're just spinning your wheels. Second characteristic that really came up was what I defined as valuing, caring, and empowering. What was striking in these examples is that those leaders that really made a difference in our life cared about us, valued us, and allowed us to perform in ways that we would have never performed before. It's very different from managing by fear and control, for example. But I would refer to leaders often as midwives. And I think the quality of leaders are in that capacity to bring others to their best and help them grow. I also read at some point the analogy of the role of manager as either a butcher or a baker. And the butcher essentially is very good at cutting costs, so I'll cut costs. But the baker will make the dough rise. And I think leaders are those who succeed in making that dough rise. Meaning, making, and unifying. Where do we go from here? What do we make of this situation? We're so often, individually or collectively, just driven by our own automatic pilot reactions. We're not thinking. And that's where I think our challenge of being more intelligent, of making meaning for ourselves and making meaning as a group. And there's many good anecdotes in here that will basically highlight examples of how leaders do this very well. And envisioning with confidence and determination is the idea of going somewhere, having an image of it, but having faith and believing in it. And if you don't have faith and don't believe in it, it just won't happen. And that's, again, interesting links with spirituality and management. The other striking difference is the idea that leaders energize positively with passion. They love what they do, and they basically engage other people with that similar passion. And that brings us forward. And yes, there are problems, but I won't dwell on the problem. I'll be able to reframe this and see this as a possibility and make others turn around and make sure that we will accomplish the task. And we see how that energy management is very core of in the exercise. And third and lastly is the idea of guiding with authenticity and exemplarity. Is you walk the talk. And if we want integrity in our organizations, well, we need intentionality. We need to know what we want. And if we need intentionality, we need leadership. It's very hard to have integrity if you don't know what you want. You'll move on every occasion. So essentially, it's a very quick overview of this, but hopefully this helps you in your own reflection in the future. And so this could be presented in this yin-yang model, and the idea again, they're interrelated. Is my way of attending to things, appreciating things, will influence how I choose to do things. And that exercise is a constant dynamic of unifying, essentially. And the last thing I would ask you as I end is a last question for you to reflect upon, and it is this. Reflect on what you've appreciated most of this session, and what does it speak about you, what you want in the future? What stands out? What really stood out in this whole thing? If there's one word or one idea, identify it, and that will also speak of what's important to you right now and what you want next. So, thank you for your time. The book is on Amazon, and I hope this little presentation has been useful for you. So all the best, and thank you again. Bye-bye.